After Jesus talks about seeds and soil, light and perception, and about containers that can no longer hold what is emerging within consciousness, he tells one of his shortest parables, the parable of the leaven. Hi, I'm Lisa. Welcome back to Biblical Reality Check. The parable of the leaven, found in Matthew 13, verse 33, reads as follows, quote, "The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour till the whole was leavened," unquote. Although it is one of the shortest teachings Jesus ever gave, a single sentence, inside that sentence is an entire model of inner transformation, perception, and the mechanics of awakening. And ironically, along with being one of the shortest of Jesus' teachings, it is also one of the clearest examples of how later writers, especially Paul, completely inverted Jesus' meaning. Jesus uses leaven as a symbol of quiet, unstoppable inner growth. Paul uses leaven as a symbol of sin, corruption, and contamination. These are not small differences. They are opposite psychological frameworks. And today, I'm going to show you what Jesus actually meant and why Paul's interpretation makes no sense in the context of Jesus' teaching. Even though the parable is only one sentence, the structure is precise. Number one, leaven is a tiny agent of transformation. Number two, leaven is hidden from the inside, so it works invisibly. You don't watch it rise, you don't control it, you don't speed it up. And number three, leaven remains hidden until it permeates everything, and the transformation is total and irreversible. Once the leaven is mixed in, the flour can never go back to what it was. If you want to understand Jesus, you have to understand the psychology, not the moralism. And the parable of the leaven is one of the clearest places to start. Jesus is not giving a moral lesson. He is providing a psychological description of how inner awakening works. It does not begin with behavior. It begins with inner transformation that cannot be seen at first. The transformation Jesus is describing is not performative. It is not public. It is not about image or reputation. You don't see the moment the transformation begins. You only see the result. This is how psychological change works. It begins beneath awareness and reorganizes your perception. Then, one day, you realize everything has shifted. Leaven represents the seed of a new perception. It starts small. It's quiet. It's internal. It doesn't announce itself and it doesn't demand attention. It simply begins to change the structure of the whole. This is how awakening works. This is how perception shifts, not through force, not through fear, not through external pressure, but through a subtle internal reorganization that eventually permeates your entire way of seeing. And this is how the kingdom, which is Jesus' term for awakened consciousness, actually emerges, not through belief or doctrine, not through external behavior, but through internal transformation. However, there is another layer to this parable that becomes clear when you look at it through the lens of systems theory. In systems theory, living systems change not through external pressure, but through internal reorganization. A small input, what theorists call a perturbation, can trigger a cascade of structural shifts that eventually reorganize the entire system. The key is that the transformation happens from within, and once it begins, the system cannot return to its previous state. This is exactly what Jesus is describing. The leaven is the perturbation, a tiny agent of internal change. The flour is the system, your perceptual framework. And the moment the leaven enters the system, the process becomes self propagating. It doesn't need supervision or force, it doesn't need moral policing. It reorganizes the whole structure quietly, continuously, and irreversibly. In systems theory, this is the principle of self organization, the system reshaping itself around a new internal pattern. Seen this way, the parable of the leaven is not simply a metaphor for spiritual growth. It's a precise description of how complex systems, including human consciousness, transform. Jesus is describing the mechanics of interchange with the accuracy of a systems theorist. A small internal seed reorganizes the entire structure until a new form emerges. This is why the kingdom comes without observation. It is not imposed from the outside, it unfolds from within. I think this is the reason why Jesus' parables have always felt supernatural to me. It's because they're describing the mechanics of consciousness with extraordinary precision. And this is also why I sometimes get passionate when talking about the self named Apostle Paul and his distortions, whether intended or not, of Jesus' teachings, of which this parable is a perfect example. Paul took this complex, one sentence parable and inverted its entire meaning, thereby giving us an entirely different and wrong framework for understanding it. Paul is speaking to the members of his church at Corinth when he tells them, quote, "Your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump of dough? Clean out the old leaven so that you may be a new lump, just as you are in fact unleavened. For Christ, our Passover, also has been sacrificed. Therefore, let us celebrate the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth." When Paul says a little leaven leavens the whole lump, he is referring to sin. When he tells his followers to clean out the old leaven, he is viewing leaven as a contaminant that creates moral corruption. For Paul, leaven is dangerous, corrupting, and something to be removed, as it is a symbol of moral decay. This is the exact opposite of Jesus' usage of the term leaven. Paul inverts the meaning of leaven because Paul's framework is not psychological, it's moralistic. Paul is concerned with sin management and behavioral control. Jesus is concerned with perception, awakening, inner transformation, and the collapse of false identity. These are not compatible frameworks. Paul's interpretation makes sense only if you ignore Jesus' actual teaching. This matters. The parable of the leaven is one of the clearest windows into Jesus' actual message because he is describing how consciousness changes, how perception reorganizes, how awakening begins, and how what he calls the kingdom emerges internally. Paul's reinterpretation turns it into a fear-based warning about moral contamination, which is the exact opposite of Jesus' message. This is why so many people grew up with a Christianity that feels nothing like Jesus, because the psychological architecture of Jesus' teaching was replaced with a moralistic framework that he never used. But here is the part most people miss. Jesus is not describing a kingdom in the sky that we someday travel to. He is describing a transformation of consciousness that unfolds within a person. We are the flower. The leaven is the seed of true perception, perception aligned with the source consciousness of creation, the underlying intelligence that expresses itself as truth, reality, compassion, clarity, and wholeness. And once that seed is planted, the transformation is inevitable. It permeates everything: how you see, how you interpret, how you respond, how you understand yourself, others, and reality. This is not any perception. It is not ego, impulse, fantasy, or desire. It is not the distorted thinking that justifies harm. The kingdom does not validate violence, domination, or exploitation. The leaven Jesus describes produces only one kind of transformation, the kind that brings a person into deeper alignment with truth, compassion, and the creative intelligence that sustains all existence. And then Jesus turns to the next question. If the kingdom begins as a seed of true perception, then what shapes perception itself? That is the question the next parables answer, what I am calling the perception parables, which include the hidden treasure, the pearl of great price, the net, the growing seed, the friend at midnight, the rich fool, and the watchful servants. Each one reveals a different layer of how consciousness interprets reality and how awakening reorganizes the entire structure of perception from the inside out. The seed has been planted, the leaven has been mixed. Now we follow their unfolding. See you in the next one. Thanks for watching.